Picture this. You're a young man from a small farming village outside Rome. Your father can barely feed the family, crops have failed for the third straight year, and your only option for survival is to march to the nearest recruitment station and pledge 25 years of your life to the Roman legions. You think you know what you're signing up for. Glory, conquest, maybe some loot if you're lucky. But what awaits you behind the walls of a Roman military camp is something far more brutal than any battlefield you'll ever face. The moment you step through those gates, everything you thought you knew about yourself dies. Your name, your past, your family, even the way you walk and talk. It all gets stripped away and rebuilt from the ground up, the ground. What emerges isn't the same person who walked in. It's something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. We've all seen the movies. Gleaming armor, disciplined formations marching in perfect unison, heroic charges that decide the fate of empires. But behind that polished image lies a reality so harsh it would break most modern people in a matter of days. This isn't a story about glory and conquest. This is about survival in a world where a single mistake could mean death, where your closest friend might be the one ordered to execute you, and where the greatest enemy isn't the barbarians beyond the walls, but the crushing weight of the system itself. Are you ready to discover what it really took to build the greatest military machine in human history? Because I'm about to take you inside the daily nightmare that forged the men who conquered the world. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will shatter every romanticized notion you've ever had about life in the Roman army. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight or the sound, it's the smell. A nauseating cocktail of unwashed bodies, rotting food scraps, human waste, and the metallic tang of blood that never quite washes out of the ground. Roman military camps weren't the clean, organized fortresses you might imagine. They were overcrowded, filthy, and disease-ridden hellholes, where 8 men shared a tent barely large enough for 4. Your new home is a leather tent called a papilio, and you'll be sharing it with 7 strangers who become your contubernium, your tent group. These men aren't just your bunkmates, they're your family, your lifeline, and potentially your executioners all rolled into one. Because in the Roman army, collective punishment is the rule, not the exception. If one man in your tent group deserts, steals, or shows cowardice in battle, all 8 of you face the consequences. Imagine trying to sleep when you know that the man snoring next to you holds your life in his hands. Every night, you close your eyes wondering if you'll wake up to find him gone, leaving you to face a punishment that could range from a brutal flogging to execution by stoning. This isn't paranoia. This is survival instinct in its purest form. The daily routine starts before dawn with the sound of the buccina, a military horn that cuts through the darkness like a knife. There's no snooze button, no rolling over for 5 more minutes. You have exactly enough time to grab your gear and stumble outside for morning inspection. And inspection isn't just checking if your sword is sharp and your sandals are tied. It's a ritual humiliation designed to break down any remaining traces of your civilian identity. The centurion walks the line like a predator hunting for weakness. Your tunic isn't folded properly. 20 lashes. Your shield has a scuff mark. Reduced rations for a week. You forgot to shave. Welcome to latrine duty for the next month. These aren't just punishments. They're psychological warfare designed to teach you that your old life, your old standards, your old sense of self-worth mean absolutely nothing here. But the real brutality begins with the training. Roman military training wasn't about building character or teaching teamwork. It was about systematically destroying your natural human reluctance to kill and replacing it with mechanical, unthinking obedience. They start with wooden swords and shields that are deliberately twice as heavy as the real thing. Your arms scream in agony as you practice the same stabbing motion hundreds of times against a wooden post. Hour after hour, day after day, you thrust and parry until your muscles move without conscious thought. The instructors don't just bark orders. They use their vine staffs, heavy wooden clubs carried by every centurion, to beat the rhythm into your bones. A mistimed thrust earns you a blow to the ribs that leaves you gasping. A clumsy footwork gets you a crack across the shins that sends you tumbling into the dirt. This isn't instruction, it's conditioning. They're programming your body to kill on command, to move in formation without thinking, to obey orders even when every fiber of your being screams in protest. The wooden training sword becomes an extension of your arm, the shield a part of your body. You stop being a person who happens to be holding weapons and become a weapon that happens to have a person attached to it. The food is another form of torture disguised as necessity. Your daily ration consists of grain, usually wheat if you're lucky, barley if you've done something to displease the gods. But here's the cruel twist. They don't give you bread. They give you raw grain that you have to grind yourself using a small hand mill that weighs several pounds and takes up precious space in your already overcrowded pack. Every evening, after a day of backbreaking training and menial labor, you sit grinding grain by the flickering light of an oil lamp. Your hands blister and bleed from the rough stone. Your back aches from hunching over the mill, and all around you, dozens of other men are doing exactly the same thing. The sound of grinding stone creating a monotonous rhythm that becomes the soundtrack of camp life. The grain gets mixed with water and whatever scraps you can find to make a thick porridge called pulmentum. If you're fortunate, someone in your tent group managed to trade for a bit of salted pork or cheese. More often, you're choking down a flavorless paste that fills your belly but leaves your soul empty. This isn't just about nutrition. It's about breaking your spirit, one tasteless meal at a time. Water is another constant concern. The camp well might be contaminated with sewage from the latrines. The nearby stream could be poisoned by enemy action, or simply fouled by the waste of 10,000 men living in close quarters. You learn to drink posca, a mixture of water and vinegar that's supposed to kill harmful spirits in the water. It tastes like drinking liquid misery, but it keeps you alive. Sleep, when it finally comes, offers no real relief. The tent is cramped, hot, and filled with the sounds and smells of 7 other exhausted men. Someone is always coughing, snoring, or muttering in their sleep about the family they left behind. The ground beneath you is hard-packed earth that feels like stone after a few hours. Your blanket is a thin piece of wool that provides minimal warmth during cold nights and becomes suffocating during summer heat waves. But the worst part isn't the physical discomfort. It's the psychological pressure of living in such close quarters with men who are just as desperate, frightened, and potentially dangerous as you are. Tensions run high when 8 people share a space barely large enough for 4. Arguments break out over everything from Warthus from the tent gets the spotter flap to who forgot to clean the communal cooking pot. These aren't just minor disagreements. In an environment where everyone carries a weapon and has been trained to use it, a simple argument over sleeping arrangements can escalate into violence that leaves men dead or permanently maimed. The Centurions know this, and they use it to their advantage, playing tent groups against each other to maintain control. But here's where it gets truly diabolical. Just when you think you've figured out how to survive this nightmare, they change the rules. The moment you start to feel comfortable with the routine, the moment you begin to form bonds with your tent mates, the moment you think you understand how this brutal system works, everything shifts. Because the Roman military machine isn't just about creating soldiers. It's about creating men who can function under constant uncertainty, who can adapt to chaos, and who never, ever get too comfortable. Your centurion might decide that your tent group has gotten too friendly, too relaxed, so he breaks you up, scattering you among strangers who view you with suspicion and hostility. The man who shared his last piece of bread with you yesterday is now in another unit, and you're surrounded by faces that look at you like a potential threat. You have to start over, rebuild trust, learn new personalities, navigate fresh conflicts, all while maintaining the same impossible standards of performance. Or perhaps your unit gets transferred to a different camp entirely. You pack your meager belongings and march for days to a new location where the rules are subtly different. where the local centurions have their own particular brand of cruelty, where the water tastes different and the local diseases are something your body has never encountered before. Just when your immune system had adapted to one set of pathogens, you're exposed to entirely new threats that leave you weak, sick, and vulnerable. The officers don't see this as cruelty. They see it as necessary conditioning. A soldier who gets too attached to his surroundings, too comfortable with his routine, too dependent on specific people becomes a liability. Wars aren't fought in comfortable, familiar settings. Battles don't wait for you to feel ready. The enemy doesn't care about your personal relationships or your need for stability, so they deliberately keep you off balance, constantly adapting, never quite sure what tomorrow will bring. It's psychological conditioning disguised as military necessity, and it works with terrifying efficiency. The men who survive this process aren't just physically tough, they're mentally flexible in ways that would be considered pathological in civilian life. Speaking of pathological, let's talk about the punishments. Because in the Roman army, discipline isn't maintained through counseling sessions or stern talking tos. It's enforced through a system of escalating brutality that would make medieval torturers proud. The vine staff carried by every centurion isn't just a symbol of authority. It's a weapon designed to inflict maximum pain without causing permanent disability. A centurion doesn't just hit you with it. He knows exactly where to strike to cause agony that will last for days without breaking bones or damaging muscles needed for combat. A blow to the kidney that leaves you pissing blood but still able to march. A strike across the back of the thighs that makes sitting or lying down torture but doesn't affect your ability to hold a shield. These men are artists of calculated violence, but the vine staff is just the beginning. Step out of line more seriously and you face fastuarium, a beating administered not by the officers but by your own comrades. Picture this nightmare scenario. You're caught sleeping on guard duty, a crime that could endanger the entire camp. Your punishment isn't death, which would be merciful. Instead, you're stripped naked and forced to run a gauntlet while every man in your century, your own brothers in arms, beats you with clubs and stones. They don't want to do it. These are men you've shared meals with, trained alongside, maybe even saved in combat. But they have no choice, because refusing to participate in the punishment means facing the same fate themselves. So they beat you, tears streaming down their faces, knowing that tomorrow it could be them stripped naked and running for their lives while you swing a club at their broken body. And here's the most twisted part. If you survive the beating, if you somehow make it through the gauntlet alive, you're not welcomed back as a hero who paid for his mistake. You're marked as someone who needed to be beaten by his own comrades. The shame follows you for the rest of your service, a constant reminder that you once broke the sacred trust that holds the unit together. For the most serious offences, there's decimation, a punishment so extreme it seems like something from a fever dream. When an entire unit shows cowardice in battle or commits mutiny, every 10th man is selected by lottery and executed by his 9 remaining comrades. It doesn't matter if you were the bravest man in the unit, if you tried to rally the others, if you were wounded and couldn't participate in whatever crime triggered the punishment. If the lot falls on you, you die. Imagine drawing that fatal token, knowing that men you consider brothers will be forced to club you to death with their bare hands. Imagine being one of the 9 who survives, knowing that you're about to murder an innocent man simply because the numbers didn't fall in his favor. This isn't justice. This isn't even rational punishment. This is psychological terrorism designed to ensure that unit cohesion becomes more important than individual survival. The truly horrifying part is that it works. Units that survive decimation become unbreakable, not because they're braver or more skilled, but because they've shared an experience so traumatic that it bonds them together in ways that normal human relationships can't match. They've killed their own brothers and lived with the consequences. After that, Facing enemy soldiers seems almost easy by comparison, but let's step back from the extreme punishments and look at the daily grinding misery that wears you down like water-eroding stone. Because the Roman military doesn't just break you with spectacular displays of violence, it destroys your spirit through 1,000 small humiliations, a constant stream of petty cruelties that leave you questioning whether you're still human. Take the latrines, for example. In civilian life, even the poorest peasant has some privacy when relieving himself. In the military camp, the latrines are communal affairs where dozens of men squat side by side over a long trench, conducting their most private business in full view of anyone who passes by. There are no walls, no screens, no dignity. Just a row of men reduced to their most basic biological functions, while others watch, comment, and make jokes. The officers claim this is about efficiency and hygiene. They say it prevents men from lingering too long or using bathroom breaks to avoid duty. But anyone who's lived it knows the real purpose. It's another way of stripping away your civilian sense of personal privacy and modesty. You learn to defecate in public without shame, because shame is a luxury you can no longer afford. The same principle applies to bathing, when bathing is even possible. Most of the time, you're lucky to splash some cold water on your face and hands from a communal basin that's been used by dozens of other men. Your clothes become stiff with dried sweat and grime. Your hair becomes matted and crawling with lice. Your skin develops rashes and sores that never quite heal because you can never get truly clean. When the unit does have access to baths, they're another exercise in communal degradation. Dozens of naked men packed into pools of water that quickly become murky with soap scum, dead skin, and bodily fluids. The water isn't changed between uses. You're essentially bathing in a soup made from the dirt and disease of every man who entered before you. But you do it anyway because even filthy communal bathing is better than remaining unbathed for months at a time. And through it all, you're constantly being watched, evaluated, judged by men whose approval or disapproval can mean the difference between life and death. The centurions aren't just looking for military competence. They're studying your character, your breaking point, your potential for leadership, or your tendency toward weakness. Every moment of every day is a test you didn't know you were taking. They're looking for signs of what they call degeneratio, the gradual decay of military virtue that supposedly infected soldiers who spent too long away from combat. Are you becoming too comfortable? Are you forming attachments that might compromise your loyalty to Rome? Are you starting to think of yourself as an individual rather than a cog in the great military machine? These questions hang over every interaction like an invisible sword. The psychological pressure is relentless because you never know which of your tent mates might be reporting your conversations to the centurions. The Roman army actively encourages informants, offering small rewards and privileges to men who report on their comrades' loyalty, morale, or private complaints. That joke you made about the quality of the food, it could be interpreted as sedition. The letter you're writing to your family back home, someone might claim you're revealing military secrets or expressing dangerous homesickness. Trust becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford. You learn to speak in careful, measured tones, even with men who share your tent. You avoid expressing opinions about the war, the officers, or the conditions of service. You smile when you're told to smile, march when you're told to march, and keep your thoughts locked away in the deepest corners of your mind where no one can reach them. But the isolation goes deeper than just watching your words. You're cut off from everything that once defined your identity. Letters from home arrive sporadically, if at all. And when they do come, they're opened and read by the officers before they reach your hands. News of births, deaths, marriages, harvest failures, all the events that shape your family's life back in your village. These reach you filtered through military censors who decide what information might affect your fighting spirit. Your sister got married? The sensors might decide that news of celebration could make you homesick and distract you from your duties. Your father died. They might withhold that information until after a major campaign, reasoning that grief would compromise your effectiveness in battle. You exist in a bubble of carefully controlled information, never quite sure whether the world you left behind still exists or has moved on without you. The physical isolation is just as brutal. Roman military camps are designed as self-contained worlds that minimize contact with civilian populations. You might march through a dozen towns and cities without ever speaking to a local merchant, farmer, or craftsman. The army has its own supply chains, its own craftsmen, its own internal economy that functions independently of the outside world. When you do encounter civilians, the interactions are carefully controlled and monitored. You're not allowed to wander freely through local markets or strike up conversations with townspeople. Officers accompany every transaction, every negotiation, every moment of contact with the civilian world. You become a stranger in your own land, a man whose only meaningful relationships exist within the rigid hierarchy of military service. The seasons blur together in an endless cycle of training, marching, construction, and maintenance. Spring means preparing for campaign season, checking equipment, drilling formations until muscle memory replaces conscious thought. Summer brings the exhaustion of forced marches under scorching sun, carrying 60 pounds of gear across terrain that seems designed to break human bodies. Autumn is for siege work and fortification, the back-breaking labor of moving earth and stone to create defensive positions that might be abandoned the moment strategic needs change. Winter offers no real relief, just different forms of misery. Cold rain turns the camp into a muddy swamp where every step squelches through ankle-deep muck. Your leather gear becomes waterlogged and heavy. Your woolen clothes never fully dry, developing a permanent odor of mildew and decay that no amount of washing can eliminate. The cold seeps into your bones during long night watches, leaving you shivering and exhausted when morning inspection comes around. And through every season, every weather condition, every tactical situation, the demands remain exactly the same. Perfect formation, instant obedience, unwavering loyalty to men who see you as expendable. Your individual needs, preferences, comfort, and survival instincts become irrelevant compared to the greater good of military efficiency. The medical care available to common soldiers reflects this brutal pragmatism. The army does have medics and field hospitals, but their primary concern isn't healing individual soldiers. It's returning as many men as possible to active duty as quickly as possible. A broken bone gets set without regard for whether it heals properly, as long as you can still hold a shield. A festering wound gets cauterized with a red-hot iron if that's faster than proper cleaning and bandaging. Pain relief consists of getting drunk on cheap wine, if any is available, or simply gritting your teeth and enduring whatever agony your body produces. The concept of patient comfort is foreign to military medicine. You're not a person deserving of care and compassion. You're a piece of equipment that needs repair so it can get back to work. Mental anguish receives even less attention than physical injury. The nightmares that follow your first taste of combat, the paralyzing fear that grips you before every battle, the crushing despair that settles over you during the long, dark nights when you wonder if you'll ever see home again. These are seen as character flaws rather than natural human responses to impossible circumstances. Soldiers who break down mentally face the same punishments as those who commit military crimes. Depression becomes insubordination. Anxiety transforms into cowardice. Post-battle trauma turns into malingering. The army has no vocabulary for psychological wounds and no patience for men who can't compartmentalize their humanity well enough to function as killing machines. Yet somehow, incredibly, most men do adapt to this nightmare existence. Not because they're naturally suited for it, not because they discover hidden reserves of strength and courage, but because the alternative is death. Your mind finds ways to protect itself from the constant assault on your dignity and humanity. You develop a kind of psychological armor that's just as important as the bronze and iron protecting your body. You learn to find small pleasures in the midst of overwhelming misery. A slightly better meal when someone in your tent group manages to trade for decent meat. A letter from home that somehow escapes the sensor's attention. A moment of genuine raids during laughter shared with Com, a brief respite from training. These tiny islands of humanity become precious beyond description, hoarded in your memory like a miser hoards gold. The friendships that do develop under these conditions possess an intensity that civilian relationships rarely match. When you've seen a man vomit with terror before his first battle, when you've helped him bury pieces of friends torn apart by enemy weapons, when you've shared your last morsel of food during a siege that lasted months, the bonds formed transcend normal human connection. These men become closer than brothers, closer than family, because they're the only witnesses to the person you've become under impossible circumstances. But even these relationships carry the constant shadow of loss. Men die in training accidents, from disease, from infected minor at first wounds that seam. They're transferred to other units, discharged for injuries, or simply disappear one night when the strain finally becomes too much to bear. Every friendship is temporary. Every emotional investment a potential source of future pain. The smart soldiers learn early not to get too attached to anyone or anything. Your gear might be confiscated or redistributed at any moment. Your tent mates could be reassigned without warning. The centurion who seemed fair-minded gets replaced by someone whose idea of discipline involves creative applications of the vine staff. Adaptation becomes a survival skill, more important than sword work or shield technique. And just when you think you've mastered this delicate balance between maintaining your sanity and meeting military expectations, just when you believe you understand the rules of this brutal game, everything changes again. Because the Roman military machine never stops evolving, never stops finding new ways to test the limits of human endurance and adaptability. Orders come down from command that seem designed specifically to break whatever fragile stability you've managed to create. Your unit gets assigned to road construction duty, which sounds almost pleasant compared to combat training until you realize what it actually means. You'll spend the next 6 months moving massive stone blocks by hand, building perfectly straight highways through mountainous terrain that seems impossible to traverse. The work begins before sunrise and continues until your hands are too torn and bloody to grip the tools. Your back screams in agony as you haul stones that weigh more than you do up slopes that would challenge a mountain goat. The engineers demand perfection in every measurement, every angle, every joint between stones. A road that's even slightly off grade gets torn up and rebuilt from scratch, regardless of how many weeks of labor it represents. But the real cruelty isn't the physical demands. It's watching civilians use the roads you're building while you're still constructing them. Merchants drive their carts over sections you completed months ago, their wheels wearing smooth grooves in stones you placed with your own bleeding hands. They barely glance at the soldiers working nearby, these faceless men in dirty tunics who make their comfortable lives possible. You want to grab these merchants by their clean robes and scream about the cost of their convenience. You want to show them the graves of men who died hauling stones up impossible grades, the permanent injuries that cripple soldiers who spent too many months breaking rocks with primitive tools. But you can't, because speaking to civilians without permission earns you a beating that leaves you unable to work for days. The irony becomes unbearable when you realize that these same roads will be used to transport other legions to wars you'll never see, carrying supplies to campaigns that don't concern your unit. You're building the infrastructure of conquest while being excluded from its rewards. Every perfectly fitted stone represents hours of your life invested in someone else's glory. Construction duty teaches you new forms of exhaustion that combat training never revealed. Your muscles adapt to the repetitive motions of lifting, carrying, and placing until you move like a machine designed for a single purpose. Your hands develop calluses so thick they feel like leather gloves permanently attached to your fingers. Your shoulders broaden from constant heavy lifting until your old civilian clothes would no longer fit, even if you still owned them. Sleep becomes even more precious and elusive because your body never fully recovers from the day's labor before the next day begins. You collapse onto your thin bedroll, feeling like every bone has been individually hammered by enemy weapons. Your tent mates groan and shift constantly, trying to find positions that don't aggravate their own collection of aches and injuries. The sounds of collective misery create a symphony that drowns out any possibility of restful sleep. Food takes on new significance when your body burns thousands of calories every day just to meet the basic requirements of survival. The standard grain ration that once seemed adequate now feels like starvation. You find yourself obsessing over every scrap of additional nutrition, trading personal belongings for tiny portions of salted meat or cheese. A single apple becomes more valuable than the coins you once carried in your civilian purse. Hunger affects more than just your energy levels. It changes how you think, how you interact with others, how you perceive the world around you. Men who were once generous with their possessions become protective of every crumb. Friends who shared everything during easier times eye each other's food portions with barely concealed envy. The social bonds that held your tent group together begin to fray under the pressure of constant want. The officers know this, of course. They understand that hungry men are easier to control than well-fed ones. A soldier whose every thought centers on his next meal doesn't have mental energy left for questioning orders or plotting rebellion. Hunger becomes another tool of discipline, as effective as the vine staff and twice as subtle. Medical problems multiply under these conditions of constant labor and inadequate nutrition. Minor cuts become infected when you can't keep them clean while handling dirty stones and muddy earth all day. Muscle strains that would heal quickly with proper rest become permanent injuries when you're forced to continue working regardless of pain. Your immune system weakens from exhaustion and poor diet, leaving you vulnerable to every disease that sweeps through the overcrowded camp. The Army's solution to most health problems is remarkably consistent. Keep working until you literally cannot continue, then receive the minimum treatment necessary to get you back to functional status. Actual healing is a luxury reserved for injuries so severe they prevent you from performing any useful labor. Everything else gets ignored until it either resolves on its own or becomes severe enough to demand attention. You learn to hide injuries and illnesses whenever possible because admitting weakness invites punishment rather than care. A limp that slows down your work pace earns you extra duties designed to strengthen the affected leg, regardless of whether additional stress might cause permanent damage. Fever gets treated with cold water and threats rather than rest and proper medicine. The medical staff views soldiers as machines that occasionally need crude repairs, not human beings deserving of compassion. So, there you have it. The brutal reality behind the polished image of Roman military might. Every marble statue, every triumphant arch, every heroic fresco was built on the broken bodies and shattered minds of men who endured hell on earth for 25 years of their lives. The empire that gave us roads, aqueducts and law was forged in camps where human dignity went to die and emerged as something harder, colder, and infinitely more efficient. Next time you see those gleaming legionnaires marching across your screen, remember the price of that perfection. Remember the men who paid it.